Men and women of Reddit who caught their significant others cheating. How did you do that? And what was your reaction? June 1st, 2018. Normal day. A Friday. My husband had kissed me goodbye and gone to work. I was cleaning the house for company who was coming to stay the weekend. The doorbell rang. There was a man at my door who introduced himself as the husband of a woman who my husband worked with. He was there to tell me that my husband and his wife were having an affair. He had busted them about 6 months prior and told his wife that she had to end the affair. He thinks that she did end it for about 3 months. But then they started up again. When he found out they were at it again, he called my husband, because he knew if he confronted him in person, he would be in a jail cell for what he'd have done. On the phone, he told my husband to leave his wife alone, or else he would come and tell me everything that was happening. Apparently, my husband thought he was bluffing, so I was literally the last to know. My husband never came home again. He got an Airbnb and a lawyer. The divorce was December 21st, 2018. We had been together for 24 years. Still hurts. Story 2. We got married when I was 17, and he was 21. He was shipping off to sea, and I was escaping a bad home life. When he came back after his deployment, he wasn't the same person anymore. After about 6 months, he gained weight on purpose to fail his physicals to get kicked out of the Navy. Fast forward a year, and I'm working full-time, and he's sitting at home watching anime and drinking during the day, telling me that he was applying to jobs. I was applying to universities when my laptop died on me. I asked to use his to finish an app, and while doing so, a message popped up on his Facebook, a topless pic of his ex from her. I was shocked and opened it to find they'd been dating for a long time. Started again while he was at sea in the Navy. He would talk to her and never to me, saying that he never had the time to email. She had sent him a pic because he said how he missed having big breasts like hers to play with, and how mine were just too small, so he felt like he was screwing a boy or a child. I confronted him and he made a bunch of pitiful excuses. I had my friends come to the house that day and kick him out while I went to work. He then stalked me for the next few years, and made posts on his Facebook about how I was a coward. He sent me emails and called from a blocked number to tell me that a restraining order is just a piece of paper, or that our vows before God made me his property and stuff like that. Then he bought a gun and started telling our friends that if he can't have me, no one can. I ended up talking to our friends and told everyone conflicting information about where I was going and moved states. I deleted all my personal social media accounts and lived in fear for years, watching him continually make memes about how he loved his wife and would do anything for her. It took 8 years for me to finally get the divorce from him. Ooh, there does run the risk of getting married that young, but escaping a bad home life is a fair enough reason. I can only imagine the whole scope on relationships wasn't fully developed, so it's not OP's fault really. That being said, this 21-year-old did not turn out to be a good person when he grew up, for lack of a better term. That manipulation is disgusting, let alone the actual, cheating. And I already know I'm going to catch flack for saying getting married young is risky, but that's all I'm saying. It's risky. Not objectively wrong. It's risky. That's all. Story 3. The story is remarkable in that it happened before the internet was widely available, in the very early 90s, when the world seemed much bigger. My fiancée, Meg, had 1 semester left of college. That had to be taken as an internship abroad for her major. She chose to go to Belgium. I stayed back, and the plan was that I would set up house, and when she returned that summer, she would move directly in and we would set a date for our wedding. So while Meg was off in Europe calling every couple of weeks to check in, the long distance was super expensive back then, sending me postcards and letters, I moved into a brownstone, bought furniture, etc. About 2 weeks before Meg was supposed to return, I stopped into a nearby coffee house that I had noticed down the block, but had yet to visit. To my surprise, I found that my neighbor from growing up in a completely different city, Claire, was a waitress there. We hadn't seen each other since high school, so we made a plan to meet up after her shift for a cup of coffee to catch up. We met and Claire told me that she was engaged as well to a man, Ben, who was completing his course of study by working on an internship in, you guessed it, Belgium. I couldn't believe the coincidence and told her about my fiancé, and that they had to know each other, right? Crazy. A couple days later, I stopped in for a cup of coffee and Claire looked upset. She asked if I had time to wait as she had a break coming up, and that she needed to talk to me. We went outside and she told me that she had gotten a call from her Aunt Sue the day before. Aunt Sue had just returned from Czechoslovakia, and that something very strange had happened. While they were touring Prague, Sue and her travel group had stayed in a local hotel, and the next morning she had run into Claire's fiancé, Ben, in the lobby, with a female companion by the name of Meg. She said that he introduced her as a student from America, that they worked together, but it was very awkward and they both looked scared. Claire said that she immediately called long distance to Belgium, and after several tries over the course of a day or so got him on the phone. She asked him about the chance encounter, and he said he had been kind of expecting her call, and ended up admitting that he had been seeing Meg pretty much the entire time they were in Europe, spending weekends and holidays traveling around with each other. I was floored. Couldn't believe it. I went home and started trying to call Meg at her dorm in Belgium, finally getting through to her late into the night, early morning for her. I point blank asked her, "Are you dating Ben?" I didn't even explain how I knew about it. She hemmed and hawed for a moment, kind of acting like I was crazy for saying something so nonsensical, but when I said I knew Claire, she dropped the facade and admitted to all of it. So Ben and Meg had a very bittersweet homecoming. Meg got off much easier than Ben, as Claire had already left all of his belongings on the front lawn from the day she found out. I did pick Meg up from the airport. I think at the time I really wanted to see her face when I told her that all of our friends knew what a piece of crap she was, and that I never wanted to see her again too. To this day, I revel in how many utterly astounding factors of complete random coincidence went into Meg and Ben being caught, who by the way later married and then later divorced after he cheated on her. The universe works in incredible and mysterious ways. Well, OP, I'm glad you found out, but what a way to find out, and what a person for her to cheat on you with. The level of coincidence is truly astounding. Both of those fiancés, by the way, pieces of garbage, at least at that time. Maybe they've sorted themselves out more in the future, but at that point in their lives, I can firmly say pieces of garbage. And then the divorce just kind of proves that a relationship that starts with cheating is not likely to go the distance. Story 4. This first started back in December, right before we went on a holiday trip to see my family. She started acting somewhat off, kinda distant and easily aggravated. I had a suspicion that something was going on, and I'm embarrassed to admit I snooped on her iWatch. Found some incriminating texts she had with a friend, so I confronted her in January. She tells me that she kissed a guy that she works with, and that was it. We were having some issues in our relationship, and I chose to forgive her, and we decided to try working on some of the issues we were having. Well, fast forward to this past May, she breaks down that she wasn't honest with me, and actually, they banged. We split after the news. We had been together 8 years and engaged for almost 2. Our wedding date was supposed to be yesterday. It's still absolutely destroying me. I don't even know where to go from here. This year can go eat a dong. Story 5. 4 years ago, I was dating a girl who became distant and disinterested in a lot of things we both enjoyed together. Despite attempts to talk about it, she only grew more distant, then became less available to hang out, and suddenly she was working late a lot. I started getting suspicious about cheating when she was on her phone nonstop. Again, I tried to talk about it, but she wouldn't engage. She also just didn't want to break up with me for whatever reason. I was actually going to end it on my own. But one weekend when she was seemingly unavailable, some mutual friends told me they spotted her with a dude from her work, and they were all over each other. Coincidentally, she had also lent me her iPad, and it was synced to her phone, so I saw a lot of texts between those two over that weekend. They were talking about running away together, etc. He was married, and her supervisor. Mutual friends were also composed of her coworkers and reported them to HR. They were both forced to do training on not sleeping with coworkers. They were both denied promotion. His wife left him and she moved overseas. Sucked at the time and I was devastated, but karma got them good. Story 6. Dated a girl for about 2 years. Like 18 months into the relationship, we're talking about moving in together. Then kind of out of nowhere, she starts becoming distant and irritable. We ended up breaking up. Fast forward 3 months after the breakup. I found that Facebook has a section where messages from non-friends are kept. Turns out my then-girlfriend was banging her ex and the UPS driver that delivered to her store at the mall. She ended up getting with the UPS driver and his 3 kids. Last I checked, they're frickin' miserable, and it brings me joy every time I think about it. Story 7. It wasn't a big, damn breaking moment. It was a lot of little things, like how she'd cancel plans at the last second, or the random phone calls from unknown numbers she would get. This was back before spam calls were an epidemic, or how her phone was mysteriously off one night when I needed to get a hold of her. I had my suspicions, and then it finally clicked into place when I did some Instagram snooping and found a guy who followed her who posted a selfie wearing a very unique jacket that belonged to her. I confronted her the next day and she denied it. Tears, begging, all that. I dumped her and walked away. The next day I messaged that guy on Instagram and he confirmed everything. Had no idea I existed. He dumped her too. Last I heard, she's an EMT in Utah, Wyoming. Hope she figured out how to not be a garbage person. I think I'm of 2 minds when it comes to cheating and stuff like that. I think being vengeful, whatever, great. I think that'll help you heal and is super fair because that person sucks. On the other hand, I really respect what OP does here. Hope she figured out how to not be a garbage person. Although spiteful and dismissive, there is probably some genuine hope. It's like, hey, hope you aren't this bad to everyone in your life, because that's gonna suck for you and everyone you interact with. Story 8. I was 8 months pregnant with our 2nd child at the time, and he wanted to go visit his brother for the weekend. I asked my doctor if it was safe for me to travel, and she said it would be fine. I told my husband I could go, but he said he was really hoping to just have some time with his brother. I understood, because a new baby makes it really hard to spend quality time, but I asked if he could take our older son, 3 years old at the time. so he could go see his grandma and cousins. He said they were planning on drinking and whatnot and wasn't sure it would be a good idea. They're country boys, so think shooting, drinking, and whatnot. I agreed and he left for the weekend. After he left, I get a call from his best friend telling me that he'll be in town for the weekend and he wanted to meet up. Not weird, he called me because my husband was terrible at answering his phone. I told him unfortunately my husband was visiting back home, bad timing. His best friend then said, "Okay, I'm gonna call you back," and hung up very abruptly. Turns out my husband and his wife had been caught by him a few months previously, and he gave them a chance to make it right. I don't know why. He didn't tell me but threatened to if they didn't stop. Well, they didn't, and he told me. I think the worst part was that my husband's family knew and never once thought to tell me. These people were my family for 5 years and nothing. It's been almost 10 years now and I'm so much happier, but it was definitely an eye-opening experience. Story 9. I was at work and tried to call my boyfriend, but he wasn't answering even after a few hours. I just got a horrible feeling. It stressed me out so badly for some reason that I started to cry and my boss let me go home. The whole way home I just kept feeling serious dread. Walked in the house and into my bedroom, and he was laying in bed, half clothed, with some chick. Obviously a huge blow-up went down, and after everything settled, this mother fricker tried to tell me that he went to the movies alone and met her there and she followed him home. Like, even if I believe that this person just followed you home and got naked, you let her do it. What's the point of saying it to me? It was a crappy, abusive relationship, and it didn't even end then. I eventually broke up with him, but not on the spot like I should have. If I could change anything about my life, it would be that I wish I broke up with that guy sooner. That was over 10 years ago now, though. Story 10. The husband of one of the women he was cheating on me with called me at work. At first, I didn't believe him and hung up. How could the man I spent the past 8 years with, had 2 beautiful children with, suffer together the loss of one of those children, do something so hurtful? Still, a part of me had doubt. He had affairs in other relationships, and we had a rocky patch early in the beginning, where I suspected he had an affair but didn't have proof. I told my boss I felt sick and had to leave early. I called this guy back and found out that my ex and his wife, along with one of their friends, were all sleeping together for about a year. He had confronted my ex and told him that he was going to tell me, but my ex convinced him to wait a month since my mother had just died. I took my time coming home and confronted him and told him to pack and leave. Since, I've pieced together a lot of what happened, and all the lies he told me, where if I was in a different headspace I might have caught on to the affairs earlier. I also found videos hidden on one of our computers, and found out he was having booty calls in our apartment while I was at work and he was watching our daughter. At that point it put the headstone on any possibility of reconciliation. Story 11. I caught my ex-husband cheating as an accident. We had gone to work in the evening and I couldn't get into my office due to a building screw-up, so he let me in his so I could print something. He went for a walk to get his steps in. As I was in on his computer, I realized it was logged into Facebook. I just had a feeling. I looked in the messages and he had been chatting with a woman he met in another country via our work. I copied all I could and confronted him when he returned. Made him take me for a drink and told him there would be no reconciliation. He was shocked, and I told him to go home and pack a bag. That was 6 months ago, and I'm really happy to have lost the dead weight. He was a difficult man, emotionally abusive, but I lived my vows and tried to help him as much as I could and reorganized my life around him. Story 12. I was in the Navy and was out on deployment for 6 months after just recently getting engaged. It's one of those stupid things that young military guys do. One day I get a letter from my fiance's best friend telling me that she caught my fiance and her boyfriend together. This was years before email and smartphones were common. We write back and forth several times and eventually it comes out how she caught them. How my fiance begged her not to tell me, and that the fiancé didn't know that we were corresponding. I eventually get back to the States and planned to play it off as if I didn't know too, but too many of my friends intercepted me with the news that it wasn't just the one guy, but several, and let me know that she knew I was aware. Eventually we met, and the confrontation was minimal and tame. We broke off the engagement without a lot of drama. She kept the ring. The best friend and I ended up hooking up, at first as sort of a revenge kind of thing, but it turned serious. And we celebrate our 32nd wedding anniversary this year. Sometimes things just work out, don't they? OP, you got incredibly lucky here. And I'm glad for it too, because this probably helped soften the blow of being cheated on at the very least. Story 13. Very unhealthy relationship. He was emotionally very abusive and I was in a terrible place with my mental health. I found out at the ultrasound to determine the gender of our child. He was late and I was noodling on Facebook waiting to be called. He was tagged in some photos in my newsfeed from a gig he'd been at on the previous weekend. Random girl was in all the photos of him and they were all over each other. Also, they were making out in the background of one photo. He turned up after I was called in. While the technician was printing the images, I told him I knew. He went off and on about how I was making it up. He would never do that. Obviously, I was lying to compensate for cheating on him and so on. When I pointed out there were photos, he stormed out and left me there. My dad had turned up during the appointment, anticipating that he would react badly if we were having a girl, which he did. That was scattered through the cheating denials, and took me home. I considered us broken up at that point and stopped all contact except texts related to the pregnancy. Mostly, I was relieved. I had concrete evidence it wasn't in my head, and I finally managed to escape that relationship. Story 14. In a relationship for 6 years. Broke up 1 month before our wedding because I found out my fiancé had cheated on me. 2 years into my relationship with my then fiancé, lots of suspicious little acts kept adding up. The biggest one being that I found some rubbers were missing from my drawer. Confronted my fiancé at the time. I was very sad, angry, confused. She denied any affair. 4 years went by. At about a month before our wedding, she broke down and confessed she had indeed slept with her ex-boyfriend at the time because she was depressed and was simply seeking any sort of way to feel something else. That broke my heart. I was also in the middle of an insane workday from home and had to power through the rest of the job with that on my mind. Yeah, not fun. Anyway, I had always had a bad feeling that she'd been lying to me over the years, and she had an underlying jealousy towards all of my friends who are women. She was clearly projecting. It hurt bad that she had cheated on me, but hurt way worse that she had lied to me for 4 years and went along with planning the wedding. I'm grateful she told me before the wedding at least, since we called it off due to the mistrust. Amongst many other things that weren't going well in the relationship, we met at a young age, so no big surprise there. I genuinely believe that she was going through some really heavy emotional turmoil from her past, so I don't take it so personally. I wish her well. With that said, I have cut off all communication to her, because simply, I can't trust her after that. All's well that ends well. I've met the love of my life, and we plan to get married as soon as all this COVID-19 stuff takes a hike and it's safe to gather in groups again. Story 15. I'd come home from a 5-month cruise. My girlfriend at the time was a court stenographer, so when she wasn't at the pier, I figured she had a case or was catching up on transcripts. So I got a ride for my friend to see an unfamiliar BMW in my driveway. I walk in to see her blowing some stranger on my couch. Keep in mind, this was my house, not hers. I didn't even say a word to her. I started grabbing her stuff and throwing it in the front yard and called her father to come pick her up, because her car was an old piece of junk and in the shop again. And up to that point, I was letting her drive mine until it was fixed. I won't bore you with the drama, but she was taken by the MAs instead of her dad. Story 16. I had my suspicions. He was supposed to go out of town, and he came home early, packed his bag, and ran out the door, barely saying goodbye to me or our children. We lived on the 5th floor of an apartment building. I looked out the window and saw him get into the car of a woman. I could tell because she had a sunroof and I could see down into the car. The look on the guard's face was priceless. Later, I got a phone call from a woman who was very upset. She said she was his fiancée. She said she worked for the airline and found that he was traveling with another woman. The other woman was the woman in the car. Later, following my suspicions, I found a receipt in his briefcase. It was for a very expensive store. I went to the store with my 2 children. One was a toddler and the other was still in a stroller. I made up some story about why I needed to know what was purchased. Purchases were quite expensive. I wasn't allowed to buy clothing for myself. Keep in mind this is an Asian country. We were expats there, and this was a very high-end store, so they kept handwritten records in a notebook. They looked up the receipt and said, "Oh yes, Mr. Z, he was here with his Thai wife." She looked up at me, waited a few beats, then her face just fell, and she said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "It's okay. I just thought he was here with his Singaporean girlfriend." The woman at the airline, I believe, has 2 children with him. The Singaporean woman went on to have 2 children with him as well, and the Thai woman had 1 child with him. All are younger than our 2 children. Oh, and then I was walking through a hotel and I caught him having breakfast with the woman he went on the trip with. And then another time I saw them drive past me in his car. I also found a trust document that, by the way, was totally fake, that he wrote for the Singaporean woman, putting her in the family trust. Keep in mind I hadn't lived in the States for 10 years. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have bad credit. I had no credit. I had no money. I couldn't go back to my job because technology has significantly changed. I had an 18-month-old and a 3-year-old. As all this was going on, I was planning to somehow leave. Eventually, I packed bags, hid them away, and tried to figure out how to get back to the States. I didn't have access to money or a credit card. He had the bright idea one day that I needed to go visit my parents. He bought me a one-way ticket, and I figured he was never going to let me come back. And that was fine by me. He married the Singaporean woman, cheating on her the whole time. I know for a fact he was engaged to someone else for 4 years while they were married. After scamming that woman out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, he basically dumped her. He moved to a different country, and he is now married again with 2 children, having never divorced the Singaporean woman. In actuality, I don't believe they were truly legally married, because he married her before we were divorced. By the way, it took me 7 years to divorce him. The most awkward dinner I ever had was when our oldest graduated from graduate school. He came back to the States with the woman he was engaged to for 4 years while married to the woman he was married to while still married with me. Are you following this? Anyway, she was a very high government official, very bright woman, and I liked her a lot. On the way to the dinner, my daughter explained to her friend who was accompanying us, "So we're going to dinner with my dad who cheated on my mom with the woman who we're trying to keep a secret from his girlfriend who we're having dinner with." Yes, those are just some of the highlights. Oh, and I forgot. When our youngest was 10 months old, he wanted to do a getaway to mend things. We went to Hong Kong. We flew separately because he had a meeting, so he said. He traveled more than 340 days one year, and I finally figured out we flew separately because he was likely doing most of the flight attendants. Anyway, I arrived at the hotel before he did and checked in. The front desk said, "Welcome back, Mrs. Z. I see you and Mr. Z were here with us last week as well." Actually, that was the other Mrs. Z. Oh, and he gave me an STI when I was pregnant with number 2. Story 17. We were together for 5 years, living together for around 4. I came home from work early. When I got out of my car, I saw her peek through the blinds to see who was outside. I walked in the door to her coworker on the couch, obviously uncomfortable and clothes messy, and her locked in the bathroom. I wanted to pummel the crap out of him then and there, but he was a trained MMA fighter, and I would have left the house that night with more than a broken heart. Went to a friend's house for a while. They started dating the next day. It sucks. Took a while for me to get trust back in relationships. In such a short story, there are so many acts of cowardice here. And I don't mean from OP not wanting to fight. That one's super fair. Cheating on your partner, cowardice. Peeking through the blinds to see who's outside, like, oh no, cowardice. Hiding in the locked bathroom, oh, girl, I hope that relationship crashed and burned. And I admittedly hope you learned from it, but I hope it kinda hurt. Emotionally, I don't want you to be physically abused. I just want you to realize that you are a crappy person, and that hurts a bit. But man, I hate this one. Well, I hate all of them, but for some reason this one got me, just with how much was in so little. Story 18. I was married. Out of the blue at work, I get an email that says, husband's name's wife. When I open the email, it lists off a name and says, husband's name, married to her. Check on Facebook. So I check on Facebook, and what do I see? Tons and tons and tons of pictures of a woman with my husband. The woman and her kids with my husband. The woman and her family with my husband. I was stunned, to say the least. It was October 6th, 2017, 7 months after I almost died from an ectopic pregnancy. Yep, we were trying at that point to have kids. After work, I went home and started throwing all of his stuff in the dumpster. He was out of town at the time, so I had plenty of time to do it. Spent all of Saturday and Sunday throwing everything he owned away. A month later, I moved into a new apartment and waited until then to tell him I was divorcing him. He then ended himself a few months later. Story 19. My ex was a big drinker and I wasn't. She would frequent this bar close to our place pretty often with friends. I rarely went because I just wasn't a fan of bars or her drinking friends. One night she went out with a couple that I didn't mind that much. I was bored at home, so I decided to head over for a bit. As I walk in, I see my ex sitting at the bar with the couple. The bar was packed. And as soon as I made eye contact with my ex, she had this strange look on her face. She turns to this guy sitting next to her and he immediately gets up and leaves. I felt something strange right away, but I brushed it off as me being irrational. I stayed for like an hour and headed home. I couldn't shake the feeling I had though, so I checked one of her friend's Facebook pages to see if there was any connection that existed between my ex and this random dude. Sure enough, he was friends with one of my ex's friends. I knew his name now and that I wasn't as crazy as I thought. I sat on the information though. The next weekend she goes out drinking again and still has not returned home at 4 a.m. I tried contacting her multiple times and no response. I woke up to her coming home at 7 a.m. and jumping in the shower immediately. I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower and she kept all of the messages with this same guy. Some pretty telling information in the texts. While she was still showering, I grabbed a fresh pair of clothes and headed to my best friend's house. 20 minutes later, I got a phone call with her going crazy about me leaving and not saying anything. I laughed at the projection, told her that if she wasn't moved out by Monday, the police would be there to do it for her. She wasn't on the lease and her parents lived 10 minutes away from me. That was that. Story 20. It was a day before my 18th birthday. My boyfriend told me he had planned to take me out in his Mazda pickup truck that we named Sparky and get some food from a bigger city down south. Make a whole evening of it. Went to school, had a good day, and nothing was off. Came home and waited. Called and no answer. Waited. I got home from school at 3:30 p.m., and it was nearly 9:30 or 10 before I gave up. I got on the computer and found out through a mutual friend from school that he was at this other friend's house. We were friends with her, and her home life wasn't the greatest. Her parents were nasty, disgusting people who treated their children like punching bags. And this mutual friend had been talking of moving out with her little brother in tow. I got in my mom's car, drove over there, and found them banging on the living room couch. I went home, told my mom he wasn't allowed in the house, I wasn't taking his calls, and I'm going to bed. I told her what happened and that I just wanted to deal with it in the morning. These days I went to bed early and woke up early. Next morning he came over like nothing happened and greeted me. He tried to hug me and I backed away. He asked me what was wrong. I told him he missed my birthday night out because he wanted to get his ding-dong wet in so-and-so's woman parts. He accused me of stalking him, cheating on him, being a controlling female dog, tried to do what is now called gaslighting. I told him I was done. He made his bed with her, and now he gets to lay in it. And that because he liked her better, obviously, they needed to be together. I told our mutual friends we had broken up due to some disagreements. Mutual friend he was inside of decided to spread it around school that she was a better lay than I was. So yeah. Is that really a flex to any respectful person? Would anyone whose opinion I care about actually be impressed by being like, yeah, so I slept with this person's boyfriend and he said he liked me way better than her? Like, this is the worst flex of all time. You're awful. He's awful. Why are you telling me this? Right before your 18th birthday too. I hate this guy. Like, I get it. Teenager, stupid, sure, whatever. Tiny bit of a pass for that. But that behavior does not go away that easily. I hope it did. I hope he worked on himself, but my hopes aren't high. I can't believe the audacity to accuse you of stalking him for that. You caught me? Oh, you must have been stalking me, you freaky girl. Shut up. I hate you. Anyway, now I'm just creating a person to be mad at in my head, so I'm gonna chill there. Anyway, that is all the stories we have for today. For now, I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.